Welcome. My name is Sydney Gary. I am the Conference and Communications Coordinator with the Natural Start Alliance. And today we have the pleasure of welcoming Dr. Arianna Pikus to share findings from 3 recent studies that explore the impacts of outdoor learning environments on early childhood development and also educator well-being. Following Arianna's presentation, if there's time, we'll hold space for a Q&A, and then we'll wrap up by the hour. Okay. So over the years, we have seen a growing body of research that connects healthy childhood development and time in nature, and it's a pretty compelling link. Children who spend more time outdoors tend to be better off cognitively, emotionally, and physically. And more recently, that connection has only gotten stronger, especially as concerns about things like screen time and reduced outdoor play continue to grow. Parents and educators are really looking for ways to counterbalance more indoor or sedentary lifestyles. And we're finding that nature, surprise, surprise, is a very powerful part of that solution. We're also seeing more research highlighting the benefits of time in nature for educators themselves. And this idea that nature supports health and well-being across all ages is super important, and we really value that in this conversation altogether. So we're really excited to have Dr. Pikus here today to dig into this further. You know, whether you're new to nature-based early learning or have been in this field for years, we know that there are always opportunities to advocate for the role of nature in early childhood. And the more research that we have, the stronger that case becomes. Dr. Pikus brings not only her research expertise, but also her experience as a former educator and preschool teacher, which I think makes this conversation especially meaningful. So just to share a bit more about our guest, Dr. Pikus is an assistant professor at Texas A&M University in the Department of Teaching, Learning, and Culture. And she's also a core faculty member with the Institute of Early Childhood Development and Education. Her research focuses on expanding access to high-quality early science education with a strong emphasis on using nature as a meaningful context for learning. She also explores how natural environments support children's development and overall well-being. Dr. Pikus applies this work to designing curricula, assessments, and professional learning that help educators bring more nature-based science into their classrooms. Her research has been published in journals such as Era Open, Early Childhood Research Quarterly, and Early Education and Development. And she also writes for practitioner-focused publications, including Young Children and Science in Children. She's the co-author of Evaluating Natureness, Measuring the Quality of Nature-Based Classrooms in Pre-K through 3rd grade, and also the Nature-Based Education Rating Scale, otherwise known as NAEBRS, which helps measure how effectively nature is integrated into early childhood classrooms. So without further ado, Arianna, please take it away.
Hi, everybody. I am so excited to be here. Thank you, Sydney, for that introduction. And what an introduction. Thank you. Okay, let me make sure that I am sharing my screen and the slides with you. Okay, welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for being here today. I'm going to share with you, as Sydney said, about 3 of some of my recent studies that I've done that kind of all come together to look at the power of outdoor learning and how this supports children's holistic development, but also educator well-being. And so broadly, we know that spending more time outside is beneficial. Been a kind of a plethora of research that's shown that children who participate in more outdoor activities, particularly in nature, these children are less likely to develop chronic illnesses such as asthma, myopia, or have chronic pain issues. And additionally, unstructured play in natural environments has been shown to improve coordination, balance, and agility in young children. And research shows that children who spend more time outside tend to be more physically active, which can help to counter rising rates of childhood obesity. We also see that children who spend more time outside have been shown to have increased socialization skills because natural environments can help to stimulate interactions between children and encourage cooperation. Playing in nature can provide children with an opportunity to be more adventurous and to take more appropriate risks. This can help them to build confidence and to teach them how to make personal judgments. And these spaces also allow children to practice leadership, empathy, and develop communication skills in authentic and unstructured ways. Spending more time outside also provides a space with open-ended learning opportunities that can support children's academic learning as well. And so most of the research we have has been just on the benefits of being outside in general. And due to these findings, we've seen a significant rise and increase in nature-based education across the United States. So this graph was taken from the Natural Start Alliance, who puts together this kind of wonderful ongoing count of the number of nature-based programs we have in the United States. As of 2022, we had over 800 programs within the US. I was just told before the start of this webinar that that number is up to 1,000 as of 2026. We were reaching over these programs serve over 25,000 students across the US. And again, as of 2022, they're present in 48 states. I'm wondering if, as of now, we've maybe hit that 50 mark. So we'll see what Christy has to say a little bit later. But so we've seen the number of these types of programs increasing throughout the United States. And so the first kind of research study I'm going to share with you is where I looked at how these nature-based programs were supporting children in their kindergarten readiness skills. And so I started kind of doing a analysis across the different states and looked at what were some of the big key markers different states used or different metrics that different states used to assess children's kindergarten readiness. And some of the big things were their early literacy skills and executive function skills. And so for this study, I compared children who attended nature-based preschools to children who are attending non-nature preschools. And the overarching aim was to investigate how preschoolers were being prepared for kindergarten in this nature-based program compared to a non-nature-based program. This study was guided by two overarching research aims. The first thing I wanted to do was investigate the amount of time each type of preschool spent outdoors during a typical school day. And this is because, again, kind of from that plethora of research that I first presented, we know that just simply spending more time outside and in these natural play environments and having opportunities for unstructured play in these environments supports children on that list of kind of benefits that I mentioned earlier. So, how much time are they getting outside? And then next, I wanted to determine if children who attended a nature-based preschool were developing these kindergarten readiness skills, such as early literacy and executive function, at similar rates to children who are attending non-nature preschools. So to start off by examine how much time each kind of program spent outside during a typical school day, my team conducted classroom observations. And so we used three classrooms from each of the preschool sites. They were half-day sessions, and we went and observed these classrooms. And we monitored we looked at what they did throughout the day, how much of that class time was spent outside. Both of the schools that we chose for this program, they received the highest score on their state's quality rating that they could, and they were in the same state. They were both from a Midwestern state. Um, and so we, again, wanted to look at what teachers were doing to support children's learning throughout the school day and kind of what was similar and what was different in a nature-based preschool compared to a non-nature preschool while accounting for the time they spent outside. And then we looked at children's outcomes and academic performance across one school year. So we did assessments in the fall and we compared that to their growth in the spring. And so for the nature-based preschool, we assessed 82 children. Approximately 55 of those children were boys, and they were on average 42.5 months old. At the non-nature preschool, we assessed 58 children, approximately 27 of those were boys, and on average, they were 45 months old. So we found in kind of the different makeup of the two programs that there were no statistical differences in maternal education or household income. However, the nature-based preschool had more boys in it than the non-nature preschool. And children at the non-nature preschool were on average about 2 months older than children at the nature-based preschool. So these characteristics where we found significant differences, those characteristics were then used as a covariate in the quantitative analysis that followed. So we controlled for those differences in the analysis. As I mentioned, we wanted to look at early literacy and executive function skills. So for early literacy, we assess children on their phonological awareness, so for this, we used the TOEFL, which is the test of preschool early literacy skills. There's 3 sections in this, but it asks children to kind of blend different sounds or parts of words together to create new words. It also asks them to segment words, and so how it assesses their phonological awareness. We also used the letter name knowledge assessment and the letter sound knowledge, and for each of these assessments, we would show children a letter and ask them to name that letter. If they correctly named that letter, they got a point. For the letter sound knowledge assessment, same thing. We would show them a picture of a letter and ask them, what sound does this letter make? And if they answered correctly, they earned a point on that. For the executive function assessments, we wanted to look at, or we measured their inhibitory control, their working memory, and their behavioral self-regulation skills. Inhibitory control and working memory, we used assessments from the NIH toolbox, and for behavioral self-regulation, we used the head, toes, knees, and shoulder assessment. So, what did we find? So, first off, we found that children who attended the nature-based preschool spent on average 90 more minutes outside every day compared to their peers at the non-nature program. And again, these were half-day sessions. So approximately 3 hours, and they were outside double the amount of time that children at the non-nature programs were, which this in and of itself, I think is huge. When we looked at their early literacy skills, again, we looked at their growth from fall to spring, and we found no significant differences. So children at the nature-based preschool were developing phonological awareness, letter name knowledge, and letter sound knowledge at a similar rate to children who were attending the non-nature preschool. So both programs can support children's early literacy development. When we looked at executive function, we found similar growth in working memory and inhibitory control. So children at both types of preschool programs were developing these skills at similar rates. However, we did find a difference in behavioral self-regulation with children at the non-nature program developing their self-regulation at a higher rate than children at the nature-based program. Now, this was really surprising to us and to my team overall, because we know that it kind of went contrary to some of the other research that was out in the field at that time. And it also kind of went against a lot of what we know about executive function and self-regulation development during this time period. So one reason potentially, so I want a precursor that I think these results should be kind of interpreted with caution. One thing we did notice with this study was that when we were trying to assess children at the nature-based preschool within the spring, children we had a higher rate of refusal than at the non-nature program. And I think this was just because children at the nature-based program did not want to leave the exciting, cool things that were happening within their nature-based classroom to come do our assessments. They were like, it's spring. There are so many cool things coming outside. They were so eager to get back to their classroom. Whereas we didn't really see that in the non-nature program. So that's something that's hard to quantify, but the fact that children wanted to return to their classroom, I think says a whole lot about these types of programs. But there also are, so I want us to interpret this with, some caution, but there's also, potentially some other explanations for this difference in behavioral self-regulation. And first, it's possible that the non-nature classrooms, kind of the overall structure of those classrooms, provide more opportunities for children to practice their behavioral self-regulation skills. So, for example, we noticed from, our classroom observations that in the non-nature classrooms, children were often encouraged to sit still, to use their inside voice, don't run around, use your walking feet. Um, you know, Common occurrences, common things we hear in a typical indoor classroom. However, children at the nature-based classroom, since they spent a majority of that class time outside, they were allowed to run around. They were allowed to shout. They weren't reminded to, use your indoor voice or use your walking feet because they didn't need to in that space. And so it's possible that, kind of just due to the systematic differences between these types of programs, children at the non-nature preschool just had more opportunities or were kind of told to practice these skills more just due to kind of the nature of the programs. Um, so it's just something for educators to consider kind of as they're moving forward. Nature-based preschools, it's suggested that they should take a blended approach in their kind of implementation of nature play within their programs. So this blended approach is finding kind of that perfect balance between the unstructured nature play time, but also allowing time for structured, intentional time. So, some recent empirical evidence from Julie Ernst and her colleagues has shown that children who attend nature preschool programs that take this more blended approach, where the program focuses on early academic skills, but also incorporates more unstructured nature play than a more traditional program would. These children or these types of programs have had a significant positive effect on children's executive function skills compared to children who attend non-nature programs. So really, yeah, trying to find that sweet spot. Another possible explanation is that, so some current research as well has found that unstructured play is predictive of children's behavioral self-regulation 2 years later. This is Colliver and colleagues have found this. And so while the current study found kind of less growth throughout our school year, it's possible that the benefits of unstructured play on self-regulation take longer to manifest. And so future work should really examine this longitudinal impact of more time in nature has on children's development, specifically of this skill. So I still think this is very, very promising. But yeah, thinking about this blended approach as we move forward. Okay, so moving on to the second study. So part of part of my work within this community, one thing I found was, because of the investment of the families and the teachers in this nature-based approach, the community banded together and convinced their local school district of these benefits. And so this local school district started implementing nature-based programs within their kindergarten and first grade classrooms, going up to second, third, and I think they now have a nature fifth grade classroom as well. So, because of the interest in this pedagogical approach and because of the benefits that families were seeing, this school district started incorporating it more into their former kind of traditional K through 12 program. And so while this wasn't the exact same kids that I had in the previous study, there was a couple of years difference between the samples. This is that same community and kind of trajectory of academic outcomes for children in these nature-based programs. And so with this second study, we wanted to look at how um, children were developing their early literacy and numeracy skills from these nature-based classrooms compared to the more traditional ones that were still in this district. So we looked at kindergarten students within this school district and first grade students within this school district. And again, looked at their literacy and numeracy development throughout the year to see, again, how this nature-based approach and pedagogy supports their learning and development. Okay, so for the kindergartners in this study, we had 185 kindergartners total over 2 school years. In the first year, we had 4 nature classrooms and there were 2 non-nature classrooms. But then in the second year, all of the kindergarten classrooms within the district transitioned into nature-based classrooms. So the district kind of went all in on this approach and said, we're only doing nature-based kindergarten, which is great. For the purposes of this study, though, we know that it can take a while for teachers to implement a new curriculum with fidelity. So those classrooms that, in year 2 were transitioning to a nature-based curriculum, we did not include those children in the sample to allow for that transition. So we had, for the kindergarten sample, 134 children in nature-based classrooms that we assessed and 51 children in non-nature classrooms that we assessed. And since these kiddos were all in the same district, they were across 3 different elementary schools, we had a similar makeup in gender and in their native English speaking. However, we did see significant differences in their free and reduced lunch status, depending on, you know, kind of which school overall they attended, and in their race. So those demographic variables where we saw those significant differences were again used as covariates in our analysis. When we looked at our first grade participants, we had 266 students total. Out of those 3 elementary schools, 2 of the elementary schools had nature-based first grade classrooms, and that's all they had. And then the other elementary school utilized a more traditional curriculum. And so over both of the school years, there were 7 nature-based first grade classrooms and 5 traditional first grade classrooms that we used in analysis. And again, differences in demographic makeups were used as covariates in analysis. For our assessments for this study, we used the progress monitoring system that the school district was already using. So I'm not sure if anyone's familiar with the Ames Web Plus assessment system, but that is what this district used. And so we looked at children's assessments in fall and again, and looked at them again in the spring and compared their growth over the year. And so for kindergarten, when we were looking at their literacy, we used the letter naming fluency assessment, the letter word sound fluency assessment, and a vocabulary assessment, all from Ames Web. And then for numeracy, we looked at number naming fluency, quantity total fluency, and concepts and applications, which is kind of like it's word problems. And so it's solving word problems and applying kind of those math skills into word problems. For first grade, our assessments for literacy were oral reading fluency, word reading fluency, and auditory vocabulary again. And then for numeracy, it was math facts using one digit, number comparison fluency, and concepts and applications, which is that word problem piece of it. Okay, always my favorite part. What did we find? So, when we look at children's kindergarten literacy, we found that children in the nature and non-nature classrooms were developing their literacy skills at similar rates. There was no statistical significant difference between children who attended a nature and a non-nature classroom, and their fall test scores was a child's fall test score in any of these assessments was a significant predictor of their spring test score, but being in a nature versus a non-nature classroom, no significant difference in kindergarten literacy. We found the same thing for kindergarten numeracy. So children were developing their numeracy skills at similar rates, regardless of if they were in a nature or a non-nature classroom. And again, fall test scores were a significant predictor of spring test scores. When looking at first grade, again, we're seeing similar growth regardless of the type of classroom that these children are in. So, children who attended nature-based classrooms, first grade classrooms, were developing their literacy skills at similar rates to children who are attending non-nature first grade classrooms. And then when we look at first grade numeracy, so for math facts and number comparison fluency, we saw similar growth across all kiddos, regardless of the type of program. But then for concepts and application, we're just on the cusp of seeing a difference between children who attended a nature versus non-nature classroom. So this is kind of right on the border of a significant difference with children in the non-nature classroom showing a little bit more growth than children in the nature-based classroom. So overall, we found that children who attended nature versus non-nature kindergarten and first grade classrooms showed similar growth in literacy and many of their numeracy skills. However, we did see that kind of just beginning to be significant difference or slightly greater gains in solving some of those math word problems for the non-nature first grade kiddos. And so this, again, similar to kind of previous findings, I see this more as this isn't cause for concern. It's just cause for us to be a little bit more intentional when thinking about kind of instruction in these types of programs. So research has shown that many elementary age children struggle with math word problems. It's that kind of bridging the gap from the concrete, seeing the numbers to that abstract representation and those types of math problems. So teachers just need to be mindful and potentially provide more explicit instruction in this area. Okay, and then the third study I'm going to share with you all today is looking at the relationship between time outside and teachers' reported well-being. So some of my prior work, had looked at districts that had really embraced this nature-based approach and, comparing that to some of these more traditional spaces. And so since that work, um, part of what I do on like a day-to-day basis is I work with more traditional programs on ways that they can incorporate more nature within their school day. And one thing, you know, the study kind of came about partially because we have I don't know, we have a gr growing, I guess, epidemic of teachers kind of leaving the field. Teachers are getting burnt out and just leaving the field entirely. And so, in talking with some of my colleagues here at Texas A&M, we were starting to wonder what can we do to support teachers' well-being and keeps these support teachers in the field and keep these well-trained professionals in the field that we need, which we know benefits the kiddos that they teach every single day. So we know that teacher well-being is related to not only teacher effectiveness and student outcomes, but it's also related to teacher satisfaction and positive emotions. And it's negatively related to burnout and stress. So teachers who report higher levels of well-being are less likely to experience burnout and stress and are less likely to leave the profession overall. Broadly, we know that time outside has been shown to contribute to a person's physical health, mental health, and overall well-being. There have been studies that have looked at this broadly in adults, and there's a growing body of research that is looking at how more time outside can help mediate some of the stress of other high stress professions, such as nursing. So we were kind of taking a cue from what we've seen in the field broadly, and we're hypothesizing that, if being outside in nature benefits adults broadly, benefits nurses in high stress careers, benefits children, we are hypothesizing that more time outside benefits teachers as well. However, before this study, this really hadn't been examined. So we couldn't find a lot of evidence on, the benefits of time outside had on teachers' well-being. So with my colleagues at A&M, we decided to explore this. And so the research questions for this study, we started with, on average, how much time do teachers spend outdoors during their typical work hours and during, non-work hours in a typical week? So how much time are they spending outside on average? And then to what degree does this time outside predict their well-being, if at all? So for this study, we surveyed 206 public school K through 12 teachers from across the state of Texas. Most of the sample identified as female and as white. On average, teachers in our sample had about 10 years of classroom experience. However, we did have a big range within our sample. And our sample included educators from elementary school, middle school, and high school classrooms in rural, urban, and suburban districts. And we had a range of free and reduced lunch status programs within this sample as well. So a pretty diverse and representative sample across the state of Texas. As I mentioned, this study, we utilized survey data. So we sent teachers this survey. They answered questions about their demographics. To assess their well-being, we used the flourishing scale. And to assess their stress, we used the perceived stress scale. And then we asked them two kind of open-ended questions. So we asked them, when weather allows, how many minutes during school do you spend outside in a typical week? And then when weather allows, how many minutes do you spend outside during non-school hours in a typical week, including weekends? So what do we find? Okay, so during a typical week, during school hours, on average, teachers are reported spending about 38 minutes outside. However, we did see a large range within this, ranging from 34% of our sample saying that they spent zero time outside during a typical school week. And we had approximately 60% of our teachers reported that they spent less than 30 minutes outside during a typical school week. When teachers reported spending time outside, it was primarily for assigned tasks such as supervising recess or doing car duty, bus duty, things like that. We did have approximately 20% of the sample say that when they could, they tried to take, their breaks outside, but teach educators weren't outside a lot during a typical school week, and when they were, it was for work purposes. When we asked them about their time outside during non-school hours, um, teachers reported spending approximately 150 minutes outside during a typical week. Again, this includes nights and weekends. We saw a large range within this reported time. When they were outside during non-school hours, they were doing things like exercising, they were doing yard work, walking or playing with a pet, or just enjoying time outside. So a lot of variability in how they spent their time outside when they were not at school. So what did we find? So to assess the impact that time outside had on their well-being, we ran hierarchical multiple regressions. And so the first step for those kind of unfamiliar with this analysis, so in step one, we put demographic variables that we know are correlated and predictive of educators' well-being. So their years of experience, their gender, and their race. And then in step two, we added, so it, we kind of control, we use that first set of variables to predict educators' well-being. And then in step two, we added other, kind of non-demographic characteristics that there is very heavily supported in the research that shows are predictive of teachers' well-being. So that included their work stress and the amount of time they reported exercising. So as I kind of mentioned earlier, work stress is negatively correlated with educators' well-being. So the more stress an educator reports feeling, the lower their well-being is. And we also know that an exercise has an opposite effect. So exercise is one of those, it can help mediate that, the impact that stress has on educators' well-being. So the more an educator reports to exercise, it's correlated with higher scores of well-being. So we wanted to control for that. And so kind of beyond this, beyond these known contributors to educator well-being, we wanted to kind of isolate the impact time outside and just time outside has on their well-being. So we added time outside during school and outside of school in the third step to really isolate those components. And what we found was that the time educators spent outside during the school day significantly predicted their well-being above and beyond all of those other factors that I've previously mentioned. So, time outside during the school day has an impact on their well-being, but there was no significant impact for their time outside of the school day. So, kind of like how we think about sleep, um, you can't, it's about how much sleep you get every day. You can't really catch up on the weekends to make up for that deficit. And so, similar to like time outside, it's the amount of time that you can spend outside during the school day. Just because you can spend more time outside at night or over the weekend, it's not making up for the time that you weren't outside during the typical school week, which I think is really, really interesting and is something that we're excited to explore further. So with this study, this study was very exploratory in nature. So this was just starting to look at like, is there anything here between time outside and teachers' well-being? And so what we found is very, very promising. It's, just a starting point and something that my team is hoping to keep building off of. Um, so future work should examine this connection further and really focus on how time outside mediates that relationship between teacher stress and their well-being. But these initial findings are really promising. And so when I talk with different administrators and school stakeholders, we talk about ways that, we can incorporate more nature within the school day, not only to benefit the students that attend those programs, but also the educators that are there every day. And so, again, with kind of making changes like this, I always advocate to start small so we can bring more nature within the indoor classroom. But we can also think about intentional design or scheduling decisions on ways to incorporate more nature um, or more time outside within the school day. And so this could be like in things like investing in an outdoor classroom or a more natural playground. Or since we found in the study that, approximately 20% of our teachers were reporting that their time outside was during their personal time, making sure we have a space outside that teachers can go and just, they're not sitting on a bench next to the parking lot, but they're in a more natural space where they can really start feeling some of these benefits. And so, yeah, this is just, kind of a first, hopefully, of many studies to examine this, but I'm really excited about, these findings and how spending time outside, again, can support not only children's development, but educators as well. Okay. Thank you. Those are, broadly those three studies I wanted to share with you. I think we have time for questions, but also here is my email address. If anybody doesn't get a question asked during this time or wants to connect further, I'd love to chat more. I'm always so happy to talk about the benefits of nature.
Oh my gosh, the chat is like buzzing with questions.
Okay. I tried not to let it distract me, but I have to tell you all of like the emojis that you sent through. It's so nice to see a clap and a heart as I'm like talking about my things. So thank you.
Yes, yeah, yeah. So yeah, let's just jump right in because there's quite a bit. I hope we can cover as much as we can.
Okay.
So let's jump back. So from the first study, there was a few questions that came in that are kind of all related to each other. So I'm trying to summarize them into one or two. But folks like Daryl and Teresa were had questions around the first study where you described that there wasn't any significant differences between the nature-based and the non-nature-based preschools and early literacy skills. There are some questions around if there were any descriptions of the teaching practices in those settings, particularly with consideration that a lot of nature preschools or forest preschools are often less didactic in their approach to instruction. And so just wondering if there was any similarities in the way that literacy was being taught.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll give a precursor that I can only kind of speak anecdotally. We did not analyze those observations qualitatively yet. I hope to in the future and really kind of dig into those different practices. But anecdotally, I think what stuck out to me, especially with the literacy practices, is that educators in both settings were engaging in a wide range of literacy practices. So, we were seeing there were a lot of songs that were being sung. There were a lot of stories that were being read. There was a lot of, new vocabulary that was being introduced, whether, in through kind of a small group in a more, traditional preschool or kind of out as we were on a hike and exploring the woods in the nature-based preschool. And so I think to me it was less about the official like the specific content that was being teaching and it was being taught in each of those programs and it was more just both programs were engaging in a wide range of high quality early literacy practices. So I wasn't surprised that we didn't see differences because both were using again high quality practices to support children's early literacy skills.
Fabulous. Okay, next question. Thank you for answering that.
Mm.
Um, Daryl says thank you, Ariana, as well. Next,
No problem, Daryl.
from Anne. Anne is wondering if it'd be possible to share this particular research on teacher well-being. Her doctoral work in the Department of Public Policy and Educational Leadership is a case study based on teacher well-being in a public community school that incorporates outdoor nature-based education. So wondering if you're willing or able to share that research study.
Yeah, if you want to send me an email, I'm happy to send you some information. So that study is currently under review, and so hopefully like will be accepted and out in the world very, very soon. But we've shared it at conferences before, and I'm happy to send you a preprint. Just it's so close to being out there officially, but I don't have a link to send you just yet. But if you send me an email, I'm happy to share any of this work with you.
Awesome. Thank you. Now, a couple of questions related to the assessment on behavior. Nicole is wondering how their ability to self-regulate was assessed, the children.
So in the preschool sample?
I'm
Yep.
yes.
Okay. So we use the head, toes, knees, shoulders assessment. And so it's a widely used early childhood assessment for behavioral self-regulation. There's three different kind of stages in it, but it incorporates all three areas of self-regulation into the assessment. And so it asks children to it starts by asking children, you basically play a game of head, shoulders, knees, and toes. Now I have to like remember how you play head, shoulders, knees, and toes. But it asks children to kind of switch the prompts. So when I say touch your head, you touch your toes. And when I say touch your toes, you touch your head. And so it requires children to, you know, use that working memory to follow those instructions. And then, it requires them to use their inhibitory control. So they have to like stop themselves from, oh, you said touch my head, but no, I should actually touch my toes. Those are the directions. And their attention as well of like focusing and following the directions and, that like cognitive flexibility of moving between the different instructions. And so, yeah, that's the assessment we used for the preschool kiddos. And again, as I said, it wasn't necessarily that we didn't see a ton of growth. I am like very cautious about those findings. Again, I think because most of our kiddos just wanted to go back and play and they were like, no, we're done with these games. So I think it's more a reflection of, the amount of assessments we gave them overall compared to just you know, significant findings.
Mhm.
Um, oh, I just saw one that popped in about IEPs. So I will say with the preschool kiddos that so we did ask about that. We for our elementary age kiddos, there were no significant differences between the kiddos with or without IEPs. And for the preschools, um, we there were no differences. I think it can be challenging to get those diagnoses in preschool. So I would it wouldn't surprise me if some of those kiddos later had a diagnosis, especially because of the families that self-selected the nature-based program as kind of seeing those benefits for their kiddos.
Awesome. And I guess so kind of a follow-up question to the HTKS head toes.
Yeah,
You know what I'm talking about.
yeah.
Teresa was wondering if you think they're, and I'm sure you chose that self-regulation test for a reason, but if you think there might have been a better test to assess self-regulation for children outside.
Not that I have come across, but if somebody else has another idea, I send it my way. That is one. I mean, again, it's very well established in the early childhood literature, and it was, especially with like integrating all three components of behavioral self-regulation. Um, it it was the gold standard. But this was a number of years ago, so that data was from 2016, I believe. So a lot. So at this point, like that's been 10 years. And so we're constantly getting new assessments. So if anyone's got a better one to use in the future, send it my way. I am always looking for them. But I do know that's one that is commonly used in the early childhood field. And so especially like wanting to share this work more broadly with kind of a general early childhood audience, it was one assessment that a lot of people really knew about.
Okay, yeah. From Jennifer, she's wondering, was there any tracking of behavioral referrals in the executive functioning study? She's wondering if that would show applied rather than tested skill development.
So there, we did kind of monitor it in the year that we were with those kiddos, and there was not, you know, we didn't see any kind of significant referral process during that time period. Again, though, that just because a child is not diagnosed or does not have an IEP in preschool does not mean that they do not need one or will not get one later in their schooling. It can take a long time to get those supports and resources. So yeah, we had no. I would have to go back to the data to confirm, but we asked teachers about that and parents, and we parent did parent surveys at each of the time points, and they were asked to report if their child had an IEP, and we saw no changes throughout the year. I believe for any of our kiddos.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Okay. We have time for maybe one or two more questions. Um, Okay, yes. From Christine, a question on assessing the quality of programming. In the first two studies presented, how are you assessing and controlling for the quality of programming provided in order to attribute outcomes for early learning and EL and
Executive. Yep. Early literacy and executive function. I got it. Those are the codes I used.
EL?
Yeah. So we chose programs that were comparable in quality. So for the preschool study, both of the programs were um, received the highest rating they could on the state quality rating system. Um, and we also like chose two sites that had comparable demographics as well. For the early elementary school study, again, they were all within one same school district. And so, they all were getting very similar professional learning. There were similar requirements for hiring those educators. They had similar, so they were as comparable of quality kind of on the surface level as we could get. I will say we did notice within the nature kindergarten and first grade study that we did see a lot of variability in quality of nature integration within the nature-based classrooms. And so differences in how teachers were utilizing nature within their curriculum. And that actually led to the development of the neighbor scale with my colleagues Rachel Larimore and Patty Bailey. So we then looked at creating a way to assess the quality of nature integration within within these types of programs. So that came unfortunately after this study, but is definitely I think something that we like are thinking about moving forward is that quality of the nature integration because we all can say that we're integrating nature within our program, but what does that look like? And we're all kind of doing it to different levels. So how do for research purposes, we really kind of did see that as lacking in the nature kindergarten and first study. And so we wanted a way to say, okay, these programs and their nature integration are comparable. So that's coming in the future.
Excellent. Okay. Thank you so much. I'm so sorry, y'all. I know there's a lot more questions, but that is all the time we have for questions today. I'm just going to close this out. But first, want to thank you, Arianna, for being with us today and sharing such invaluable reportings from your recent research. And as I said at the beginning, we cannot have too much research on this topic. So thank you for your contributions. And
Happy to be here. Thank you, everyone, for your time. And if you have more questions, feel free to email me.
yeah, we will be sure to include your
Okay.
email address on the webinar page. And if you're interested in hearing more from Dr. Pikus, she'll be presenting this session, Roots and Beginnings, at the upcoming Nature-Based Early Learning Conference, which takes place June 24th through the 27th in San Antonio. She and her co-presenter, Hannah Thompson, will share insights from a recent program supporting parent and infant toddler well-being through weekly time in nature. And while we're also talking about the conference, just quickly a plug to let you know again that registration is open. You can join us again in San Antonio or online. If you're coming in person, it's a full 4-day experience in partnership with the San Antonio Zoo and with the Will Smith Zoo School. We'll have special gatherings on Wednesday, the 24th, June 24th, 2 full days of sessions on Thursday and Friday, and then optional site tours at local nature-based programs in and around San Antonio. If you prefer to join online, you'll get access to 50 plus on-demand sessions for a full year, plus a live workshop during conference week, in addition to live sessions that will take place during conference week. So you can check out the details of the event and register at conference.naturalstart.org. We'd love to have you there. And that's it from us today. So thanks for spending your time with us. This is our last webinar until after the conference. So until then, take care, and we hope to see you in June. Bye, everyone.